All right. Welcome this afternoon to another engagement of the 100th anniversary of Crystal Lake Speaker Series on the history of Crystal Lake. My name is Ryan Pettit, and I am a member of the Crystal Lake Historic Preservation Commission. Today I'll be sharing an overview of the histories of the oldest congregations in Crystal Lake. So today I will share with you the histories of the oldest religious congregations in Crystal Lake. Like I said, the data utilized for this presentation was gathered from Crystal Lake Historical Society and from meetings with some of the congregation's church members and officials. So I thank everybody who helped me out with this. And we start out with the oldest congregation, which is the Ridgefield Crystal Lake Presbyterian Church, located on Church Street in Ridgefield. The Ridgefield Crystal Lake Presbyterian Church was organized in February of 1839 with the help of Reverend N.C. Clark of Elgin. It was originally known as the Presbyterian Church of Virginia, McHenry County, Illinois, because at that time the area was known as the Virginia Settlement, because the first settlers originally came from Western Virginia, which today is West Virginia. The first meetings were held at the home of Christopher Walkup. In the 1840s, with the continued settlement of McHenry County, members of the Virginia Presbyterian Church were sent to start a new organization in other towns, including Crystal Lake, Hebron, Geneva, Marengo, and others. This obviously had a negative effect on the membership at the church. However, the church was able to rally from the loss of its members, and in 1847 erect a 20 by 36 building near the Walkup House north of Ridgefield. This site is currently home to the Resurrection Catholic Church near the intersection of McConnell Road and Country Club Road. Development did begin to take place near the church, including construction of a school, shops, and a post office. And this area became known as Elysium because the place was, quote, so delightful and the people so happy. However, in the 1850s, the railroad set up a station at Ridgefield instead, and the church was moved and became the Presbyterian Church of Ridgefield. In 1872, the organization felt the need for a more suitable house of worship. A 36 by 56 foot church was built for $6,000 and finished in 1874. A parsonage was built next door during the same year for $2,500. The very large steeple on this side was lost in a windstorm in 1906 and was not replaced. And the next year, the smaller steeple was removed as well. And over here is the parsonage, right next door to it. The church was hit hard financially in the early 1950s, which led the members to look into cost-cutting measures that included holding worship in the basement to avoid having to heat the sanctuary, renting out the manse to the Grange and other groups with the condition that no dancing was allowed, and the creation of what was known as the Lord's Acre, which was an 85-acre tract of land used to grow barley, corn, and hay, with the sale proceeds going to the church. However, this effort was curtailed by the presbytery because the funds had to be raised through the support of members. The church was a charter member of the McHenry County Historical Society in 1963. In 1964, the chancel was rebuilt with pews and choir stalls acquired from McCormick Theological Seminary, which were restored and installed by the congregation. In 1966, the addition of 2 schoolrooms, storage areas, and an entrance at the street level was completed. Due to growth in the Crystal Lake area, the name was changed to Ridgefield Crystal Lake Presbyterian to reach out to the larger community. In 1974, the former parsonage was moved to a parcel near Country Club and Hillside Road and currently serves as a private residence. From 1970 to 1980, Sunday morning worship services were broadcast on WIVS radio in Crystal Lake. And on February 8, 1989, the church celebrated its sesquicentennial, and later that year was plaqued as a historic site by the McHenry County Historical Society. Next, we move over to the First United Methodist Church, which is located at 236 West Crystal Lake Avenue at the intersection with Dole. In 1839, the Crystal Lake Methodist Church Society was founded as a preaching station on the Crystal Lake Circuit of the Des Plaines Conference. In 1858, the first building was constructed at a cost of $1,400 on Virginia Street across from McCormick Park. The church split when members from Nunda wanted to move the church from Crystal Lake to Nunda. The Nunda congregation purchased the old Congregational Church building in 1867 and moved it from Crystal Lake to Nunda. However, the two congregations reunited in 1873, built a new church at the corner of Brink Street and Williams. A 3-story parsonage was also built across the street in 1899. I don't know why that just happened. Okay. As membership grew over the years, it was necessary to remodel the original church in 1898 and again in 1920. Between the years of 1945 and 1956, because of growth, 6 acres of land were acquired at the northwest corner of Dole and Crystal Lake Avenues to build a new church. Along with new members came more cars, and parking in downtown Crystal Lake was at a maximum. So seating and parking were both becoming an issue at the old location. That old picture's not coming back. Okay, I don't remember putting animations in this. I told you using Office 2003 was going to have a bad effect on this. Okay, so just use your imaginations. In 1954, a new church was built consisting of a sanctuary and fellowship hall and classrooms. In 1954, the old parsonage was moved down William Street to 20 Paddock Street and is still standing today. Okay, there's a picture of the house moving down William Street. You see the Rao Theater there on the right. I don't know what's going to happen next. Okay. In the 1960s, growth necessitated an addition that included classrooms, office, and storage space. The name was officially changed to the First United Methodist Church in 1975 after the merger with the Evangelical United Brethren Church. Construction began in 1991 on a 28,000 square foot addition, including a 525-seat sanctuary, classrooms, and renovation of the original building. The first worship held in the new sanctuary was on Mother's Day weekend 1994. Okay, the next stop on our tour is the First Congregational Church of Crystal Lake, located at 461 Pearson Street. In January of 1842, religious residents of Crystal Lake and the surrounding area met with Reverend N.C. Clark and Reverend C.L. Hall to organize a church. Monthly meetings were held at the homes of members and at the schoolhouse in Crystal Lake. On March 8, 1845, the congregation voted to build a church, which was dedicated June 14th of 1849. However, by 1863, the congregation resolved to build a larger church. It was 1866 before the plans got underway after 4 lots had been purchased from Mr. S.S. Gates at $100 per lot, with 1 additional lot donated by Mr. Gates. The church was originally built without a basement to help save money, and the old church was sold to the Methodist Episcopal Society for $400 and moved to Nunda. Services were held on the 3rd floor of Pearson Hall while the new church was being built. The new church was dedicated July 19, 1868, after a final cost of $7,000 to build. In 1869, a chapel was added to serve business meetings and other gatherings. On July 10, 1875, a bell was donated by Mr. Franklin Dyke and was installed. This bell weighed 1,586 pounds and was 48 inches in diameter. It was said it could be heard as far away as Marengo and Barrington. In 1914, the chapel was torn down and a basement was built underneath the church. The original 2 front entrances were closed off and a new single entrance was constructed. In 1915, a parsonage was built for the Reverend. February 15, 1922, the church officially incorporated under the state law as the First Congregational Church of Crystal Lake. Financial hardship hit the church in 1931 when the United States Bank closed had closed, taking the church funds with it. Reverend Flugum, hope I'm not saying that wrong, offered to match donations up to $250, and in 1933 offered to take a pay cut of 10%. Money was borrowed from members of the church to pay the bills, but in 1933 it was written that, quote, a crisis in the church existence was reported July 12th of 1933. This was noted because attendance was falling off and people were losing interest in the church. This actually led to conversations about suspending the church operations. However, in 1935, with the arrival of Reverend Dalrymple, things began to turn around. He organized the Add a Friend and Men's Club to help boost membership and began Holy Thursday and midnight Christmas Eve Mass. In 1939, the finances stabilized and debts were again being paid. And by January 1940, membership had recovered to 261 people, and by January 1942, it was up to 315 members. On July 19th, a service flag was the service flag bearing the name of 18 members in the armed forces was also dedicated. By 1946, extra room was needed for church school classes that had been meeting in the basement of the parsonage. Several other projects were completed by January 1947, but by 1950, another addition was added, and it was said that the building facilities are the best available in the area. By 1953, the church would vote to extend these facilities once again to Florence Street, which was completed in 1955. In January 1955, the church membership stood at 850 members, and the school enrollment was at 405. During that year, the church added the Haskins Memorial Chapel and the Edna and Otto Gross Children's Chapel. And by 1959, membership had climbed over 1,000 members. In the 60s and 1970s, many changes took place, starting with the 1961 purchase of the nuns' home from St. Thomas Catholic Church to make room for additional parking. In 1964, a new constitution and bylaws were adopted. In April of 26 of 1966, the 125th anniversary is celebrated. And on July 1st, 1969, Pastor Dalrymple resigned after 34 years of service. With the arrival of James Biddle to the church looked forward with optimism to the future in the 70s. He came with ideas of replacing rigid thoughts with open minds and the role of FCC in the world and in Crystal Lake. Part of his mission was the establishment of a governing board, which was formed along with several other groups. These expanded horizons, although having a major positive impact on the community, came at a rather high financial cost. However, by 1975, membership had reached 1,669 persons. Okay, the next congregation is the St. Thomas the Apostle Catholic Church, and there are two locations, one on West Terracotta Road and the original location at 453 Pearson Street. In 1856, traveling priests made their first visit to Crystal Lake. Mount Thabor Cemetery was the site of the first Catholic meeting place in the area. They met in what was known in a log cabin known as the Little Church in the Bush. Early Catholic settlers were buried at Mount Thabor Cemetery. St. Thomas was organized in 1859 by Father Patrick Mahan of Heartland and included 225 charter members. In 1913, St. Thomas became an independent parish, and the first permanent pastor, Father Edwin A. McCormick, arrived on January 9th, 1913. He would serve until his death in 1955, and McCormick Park is named for him. In May of 1922, Miss Libby Reynolds donated 4 lots for a new church. And in addition to that, a new rectory was constructed at Pearson and King Street that year, with Father McCormick moving in there in 1923. In 1924, the new church construction began and would end up costing $70,000 and have seating for 500 parishioners. In June of 1927, construction on a new school began, and the school was ready by September 1927, when it opened with enrollment of 100 students at a cost of $50,000. A convent was purchased at Pearson and Florence Street in 1927 to house the Dominican sisters who taught at the school. Again, this convent was torn down for a parking lot. The 1925 church features many stained glass windows showing important figures and events in biblical history, as well as a memorial for fallen service members. Now, this I remember putting in. Okay. As you can see, there's windows covering the Blessed Sacrament, and both of those are that. Madonna in the Rosary, Blessed Virgin Mary and Sacred Heart of Jesus, St. Cecilia and St. Thomas the Apostle, our Lord, the Lord appearing to St. Margaret Mary, St. Matthew and St. Mark, St. Luke and St. John, the dove, which is the symbol of the Holy Ghost. There is a statue of St. Thomas the Apostle in the exterior of the building. This here is the patriotic window dedicated to our Blessed Mother. It was donated by all parishioners to perpetuate the memory of our boys who have died in the defense of our country. And this one is out of sort. Okay. Agony in the Garden and St. Bridget and St. Patrick. And St. Joseph and St. Anne and the Annunciation. In 1959, a new school building was built with facilities for up to 800 students, and this building is located at King and Pearson Street. A new rectory was constructed at Washington and Pearson Street and occupied in June 1959. The old rectory at that time, in February 1960, was transformed into the convent for 14 nuns. Membership in July of 1960 was 952 families with a school enrollment of 700, and by 1962 the school had 750 students. The new location on Terracotta Road, ground was broken on March 20th, 1967. And it is actually located at the intersection of Oak Street and Route 176, and the first worship was held Easter Sunday, 1968. Next on our journey here is the Emmanuel Lutheran Church, which is located at 300 South Pathway Court in Crystal Lake, down behind Jewel. The first known Lutheran immigrants arrived in Crystal Lake in 1863. Lutheranism is said to have started in Crystal Lake with the baptism in 1868 of the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. John Ritt. The first church service held October 17, 1868, was held October 17, 1868 by Reverend Henry Schmidt. Emmanuel Lutheran was organized on December 26, 1870 as the German Evangelical Lutheran Emmanuel Congregation with 36 members. Originally held services in private homes and rented spaces. In 1875, a 20 by 36 schoolhouse was built as education was a top priority of these members. Church services took place in the school as well. In 1877, the old Methodist church was purchased for $400 and moved to McHenry Avenue next to the school. In 1879, financially delinquent members were invited to voter meetings to give cause for their delinquency. Should they not come or contribute, they were removed from the membership roll. In 1885, the original school building was replaced for $850. And in 1895, the church purchased 4 lots south of the school for $450. Mr. John F. Lang was awarded the contract to build a new church for $5,000, and he broke ground on June 30th, 1895. A church bell weighing 2,000 pounds was purchased and installed, and the new church was dedicated on November 10th. In 1904, the parsonage was built. In 1906, a new brick school was built for $9,400 and is still located today on McHenry Avenue. It was dedicated on September 2nd, 1906. In 1910, electricity was added to the church. In 1913, water was added to the school and parsonage. Services were conducted in German every Sunday morning, with English once a month on a Sunday evening. However, religious instruction in the church was taught in English. By 1921, there were 2 worship services on Sunday mornings, one in German and one in English. By 1955, a new parish hall and school addition had been dedicated on May 15th. In 1965, worship services were broadcast once a month over WCLR radio. In 1966, a new parish and administration building was attached to the south of the school gymnasium. And in 1968, the congregation membership totaled 2,000 members. In 2008, the new church and school were built at 300 South Pathway Court. The old school on McHenry Avenue is now Faith Lutheran High School. Membership in the church is now at 1,600 baptized members, and the school has 200 students in K through 8th grade. Okay, next is St. Mary's Episcopalian Church. Originally, in 1873, the first Episcopalian church was established in Crystal Lake, known as Trinity Church, an Episcopal church. In 1879, a building belonging to Charles Dole on the south side of the lake was converted into a chapel. However, by 1884, the congregation had disbanded after the loss of the reverend and dwindling membership. In 1922, the Rigby family moved to Crystal Lake and inquired with the Bishop of Chicago as to where they could attend Episcopalian church services. The Bishop of Chicago immediately sent the priest in charge at Dundee, the Reverend Philip Flophless Svederstorm. I'm sorry, I'm not good at Swedish. To minister in Crystal Lake. In 1927, they had enough members to warrant the purchase of a building, and a 6-car garage on Henry Hobart's estate along Oriole Trail was acquired. Mr. Hobart's sister was a member of the church. Over the next several years, the garage was converted into her church, by first being divided into a chapel and guild hall. Mrs. Getty Moses was instrumental in this effort by organizing work parties and social activities for the members. She was known as Aunt Getty because of her ability to, quote, get whatever she went after. The church formally became a mission of the Diocese of Chicago as St. Mary's by the Lake in 1928. In 1936, the sacristy and utility wing were added. Seating for 50 people, plus 15 seats for the choir. However, the building still lacked restroom facilities, and the water had to be shut off during the winter to avoid burst pipes. The altar guild was responsible for bringing water to all services during the winter. Between 1944 and 1947, lots were purchased on McHenry Avenue between Franklin and Paddock Street for a planned church, parish hall, and rectory. It's where the current elementary school is. However, in September 1947, 5 acres of the property of Mr. Major Gates and Miss Rosalind Mathis along McHenry Avenue were purchased for $40,000. And the original land was actually given to the Bishop of Chicago, which then obviously ended up in Crystal Lake's hands for their school. Ground was broken on a new church in November of 1957, and the church was designed by First and Tilton Architects of Evanston. The building effort was headed by a chairman of the building committee, Mr. James Purcell, who was in charge of overseeing the construction. Mr. Purcell was an estimator for a large construction firm in Chicago that specialized in churches and schools. And instead of going straight home after getting off the train each night, he would stop by the church, look over the work of the contractors that day, and if it did not meet his very strict standards, it was torn down and redone. His efforts resulted in work finishing within $125 of the budget estimate. On September 14, 1958, the final service was held in the little church. The hallowing of the new church was held that afternoon. The little church was then sold for $5,000 and converted into a residence, which is still standing. The church officially became a parish in 1966 after much growth in membership and became known as St. Mary's Church. In 1977, the mission house, or the parish house, was renamed for Reverend Kenneth Tarpley, who was a deacon who came to Crystal Lake in 1936, taught for 36 years at Crystal Lake Community High School before he died in 1972. Okay, now the Swedish Mission Church, which is now known as the Evangelical Mission Church. The original church on the left was located over at Crystal Lake Avenue and Lincoln Parkway. And the new location is on Crystal Lake Avenue west of Pingree. It is believed that the Swedish Mission Church started in 1875, but it is hard to tell because there are no written records of the group until 1893. They first met in the chapel that was constructed by Charles Dole on the south side of Crystal Lake. In 1877, the group moved to the home of Peter Nashland, which his house was along Lincoln Parkway. And by 1893, the decision was made to build a house of worship. This effort was facilitated through Mr. and Mrs. Mons Peterson donating $100 and a large lot. And during the summer of 1893, the church members built a small church. Over the next 10 years, they were ministered by theology students from Bible institutes in the area. The congregation officially organized in February 1903 as the Swedish Mission Church of Crystal Lake with 7 official members. And the services were held in the Swedish language until 1917 when a Sunday evening English language service was started. In 1918, the adjoining lot was purchased, and in 1921, the small chapel was moved to this lot and was remodeled and rededicated. In 1936, the congregation voted to change the name to Evangelical Mission Church, and the Swedish language was officially removed from all services. In 1949, a parsonage was acquired from Ed Johnson at 49 Maple Street. In the 1950s, additions were made to the north side of the church. In 1993, the congregation built a larger church further east on Crystal Lake Avenue, and the old church was sold to the Salvation Army. Okay, next we have St. Paul's United Church of Christ. The original church that you see here is located on Ellsworth Street still. The current church is located on Woodstock Street between Oak and Virginia. St. Paul's was established in the summer of 1896 as a mission venture by Reverend Carl Lose. After an 8-year period of dormancy, the church reorganized in 1906. In August of 1907, 3 lots on Ellsworth Street were purchased for $850, and in 1910, the church was built. In 1919, they purchased the C. Siren House on Ellsworth for the parsonage. The years that follow were not particularly encouraging. Membership remained small, and there was a revolving door of ministers coming and going from the parish. Post-World War II saw revitalization and increased membership through the effort of Reverend Harold Wilkie, who was handicapped by missing arms, and yet he still managed to climb mountains and play a game called dartball. In 1955, growth reached the point that a study was commissioned to study the need for a larger facility and to relocate. They were not able to add on to their current church because of zoning laws. And most members lived in the neighborhood and did not want the church to move. And there was also concern about the ability to raise the funds. However, 7.5 acres were found on Woodstock Street, and construction commenced August 1959. With much of the work done by the parishioners, the church was officially dedicated June 1960, and a new parsonage constructed in 1966. In 1968, Due to the additional growth of the church, it was dedicated to the Reverend Walter Bloish. Okay. The Swedish Lutheran, known today as the Bethany Lutheran Church, at the corner of Crystal Lake Avenue and Elmhurst. The organization of the Swedish Evangelical Lutheran Baptist Church. The first meeting was held on February 23, 1923, at the German Lutheran School, and a constitution was adopted. The church board was elected on February 28, 1923, and a motion to purchase a building at the corner of Maple Street and Crystal Lake Avenue was made April 27, 1923, with the first Holy Communion service held at St. Paul's Church May 13, 1923. So 1923 was a very special year. The building site selection, the recommended site at Maple Street and Crystal Lake Avenue could not be acquired. So a lot at Elmhurst Street and Crystal Lake Avenue was immediately purchased for $3,000 from Dr. William Rupert. On August 5, 1924, plans for construction of the building had been authorized after a loan was acquired for $5,000. Construction of the church began September 1924, when contractor Nels Kling broke ground. Members of the church helped dig the foundation to help cut back on the cost. And by September 27, 1925, the church building was complete. Student Henry Hedlund was called to be the first resident pastor, and he arrived June 1925. Membership continued to grow, as was evident in January 1926 with 86 members, and January 1927 with 110. Much like the Swedish Mission, the Swedish Lutheran had a language debate, and in 1926 at the annual meeting made a motion to have services held in English only during June, July, and August, when several people would obviously come from Chicago out to the lake. At the annual meeting, but by the annual meeting held January 10, 1930, it was voted to have all services in English. A parsonage was completed in the summer of 1931. Membership continued to grow through the 40s and the 50s, and an educational wing was built in 1958 and occupied in 1959. The 1960s was another period of growth as Crystal Lake continued to grow as well. They officially transitioned to the Lutheran Church of America by adopting a new constitution between 1962 and 1963. Bethany Lutheran officially incorporated July 16, 1963, with membership now at 368 members. On February 8, 1965, expansion and remodeling of the sacristy was approved, and by 1969, membership was up to 550 members. In the 1970s, the growth trend continued, and new facilities were anticipated and built. Neighboring lots were purchased for anticipated future growth, as membership in 1972 was at 686 adults. And in 1975, the congregation approved resolution to build a larger worship and education center. July of 1978, the congregation approved the final plans for their current facility that stands today at Elmhurst and Crystal Lake Avenue. Last but certainly not least is the First Baptist Church of Crystal Lake, located off Route 31 north of US 14. And I had thought that they were related to the original Baptist church that was founded in Crystal Lake in 1843, but was inactive by 1922. But they are not related. So this Baptist church, the First Baptist Church, was founded by Preston Denton in 1959 after he posted an article in the Crystal Lake Herald looking for persons interested in starting a local Southern Baptist church. They originally met in the Masonic Temple above the old City Hall and rented the fire department. The new church was sponsored by the First Baptist Church of East Benton, Illinois, and the first service was held January 3rd, 1960. With the Masonic Temple being vacated and growing membership, a permanent meeting place was needed. Recommendation by the building committee to purchase a house and adjoining lot at 4814 State Street in Crystal Lake Manor for a meeting place and parsonage. The first service was held in the basement of the house July 3rd, 1960. On November 2nd, 1960, the church was officially constituted as the First Baptist Church of Crystal Lake with 24 members. In 1961, the sanctuary was constructed next to the parsonage and occupied in July of that year. Attendance continued to grow, as did the need for larger property and building. Sunday school rooms were being rented out at the Manor Motel across at Manor Road from the sanctuary. They considered several properties before deciding on several acres on Route 31, and construction started in 1969, with the new church being dedicated March 7, 1970. Additional improvements were made in the mid-1990s to handle the continued growing membership. However, by the year 2000, there were issues with overcrowding, and services had to be held for a period of time at the Crystal Palace Theater. By May of 2001, the church voted to completely renovate the church on Route 31 and return there in October of 2001. And that concludes my presentation. I hope you all enjoyed it and you learned something today. If you have any questions or comments, I'll be sticking around for a little bit. So, have a nice afternoon. I'm waiting for your reaction.